So I decided to take advantage of a break in the rain here, out here in Red Bank. And I've been meaning to come out here for a while to do something like this, and then figured I should probably do it now since next month will be the 30th anniversary that Kevin Smith's debut film Clerks was released to a wide audience. Technically, it already had its 30th anniversary in January because that's when it debuted in 1994 at the was it the Cannes Film Festival or Sundance? I can't remember, but I figured I should probably do this before October at least, just because, yeah, I've been meaning to talk a little bit about my connection to Kevin Smith films throughout the years, how I've fallen into love with Kevin Smith films, how I momentarily kind of fell out of love with Kevin Smith films, and how I've been able to appreciate not just the old but the new with a different perspective, especially given sort of my emotional shifts as of late, as some of my latest film projects can attest to. When I first watched movies like Clerks and Mallrats, Chasing Amy, um, I enjoyed them for what they were. I was very much in that teenager mentality and mindset where the comedic aspects were appealing more to me and kind of being like a voice of a certain generation that I could relate to. The nerd culture aspect, especially, was something that I gravitated towards. Of course, conversations about labor on the Death Star, having Stan Lee show up in a cameo back when that wasn't the norm, when he was still alive. Building your own shared cinematic universe and mythology around a central group of characters, or at least a central duo in Jay and Silent Bob. I really responded to that stuff in more the entertainment fashion. And it wasn't until Dogma came out that I really got into something a little bit deeper. As much as I love Clerks, as much as I love Chasing Amy, as much as I can appreciate kind of the candid, honest storytelling and writing that Smith was going for in those projects, something about Dogma really resonated with me, and I believe was one of the stepping stones that kind of cemented my view on spirituality and religion in general. Because yeah, I wasn't raised Catholic, but I was raised with church in my upbringing to some degree. I was raised Presbyterian and was still Presbyterian when Dogma came out. And even then, even though Catholic, Dogma, Catholicism in general is far more, I'd say, rigid, or not as stringent as Presbyterian beliefs are, I found myself really relating to the idea of why am I, what am I exactly beholden to in this world to work towards some eternal reward, basically. And is that eternal reward actually something that I want to achieve for myself, or is it just to be a decent person and to be someone with great ideas rather than beliefs in this world? Because that was definitely one of the aspects of the film that I responded to when the Chris Rock character Rufus says, I just think it's better to have ideas rather than beliefs, because ideas can change, beliefs can't. People die for them, people kill for them. And the whole premise of that film is based around the idea that, yeah, people invested so heavily in a certain belief that they can't flinch away, they can't bend with it, it can't be flexible, and it's an existential threat throughout the whole film. And I really responded to that idea that, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I want to believe in something, but I don't think it's this specific thing. And I don't think it's necessarily a belief that I want to be born out of, well, this is what I'm working towards. No, I want to work towards things right here in the now. And I guess I went from being Presbyterian, baptized Catholic, to being sort of a Buddhist when I moved out to the West Coast, or not West Coast, the East Coast, to New York, and then eventually settled on being somewhat agnostic and being okay with the idea, like, you know what, I'm not going to work towards some sort of eternal reward, and I'm not even sure if there is anything eternal after this. If there is, great. If not, c'est la vie. And, you know, that's come with some goods. And as my last full film project, Companion, demonstrated, it also came with some bads, like my fear of seagulls. No, but seriously, more about like my reflections on mortality, my reflections on, you know, feeling my age now. And I guess that's something I want to do, is whenever I do have this aspect of mortality and death kind of creeping up in my mind, I need to give myself things, give myself opportunities to get away from it, to explore what's right here, right now for me, the joyful aspects. And certainly coming out here to Red Bank, home of View Askew, home of Kevin Smith, that is something that maybe I should try out. Now, I've been out here before. I came out here with my friends Max and Dan when they visited me so we could go check out the secret stash. You know, we're nerds. We wanted to see what that was about. For us at the time, secret stash was like nerd mecca. And then I came out a second time here when Kevin Smith actually did a signing for a series of Hit Girl books that he was writing, and a story he had written for, I think it was Detective Comics 1000. And I actually got to just meet him for about like 2 or 3 minutes. We had a photo opportunity. Got him to sign his autobiography for me, got him to sign my Clerks DVD. I got to gift him a hand-drawn picture of Leia and Chewbacca because Peter Mayhew had just passed away. This was in 2019, I believe. And I had already created this picture and put it up, you know, for people to see in digital format. But I'm like, you know what? You know who would probably appreciate having a hard copy of this? Kevin Smith. So gifted that to him in a frame. Hope he found a place for it somewhere. If not, it's okay. But, you know, I just wanted to gift a fellow Star Wars fan something. And yeah, was very much appreciative of what his films, what his books, what his podcasts had offered me at that time. Even though I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of a lot of his stuff. Up through Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, he pretty much had me on board. And Clerks 2 came out in 2006, I believe, and at that time I was still in college. I was getting ready to kind of transition into, you know, my future. Had the plan in mind, and I didn't respond to Clerks 2 as much as a lot of my friends or, you know, contemporaries did. Possibly just because the theme of that wasn't gelling with me at the time. The idea of being stuck in kind of a cycle for a decade and wondering like where the time has gone, what have we actually done with our lives, and so forth. That was kind of the central crux of that film, amidst, you know, the profanity, the gross out humor, the cameos from Ben Affleck, the donkey show, things like that. And I just wasn't as open to that theme at the time, I guess. But especially in the past couple years, as I went back to revisiting some of those films, those themes have been a little bit more prevalent. And I've been able to kind of appreciate the more dramatic aspects from Dante and Randall when they have their conversation in the jail cell. And they're talking about like how frustrated they both are equally with where life has kind of directed them at that point. And why don't they take the next step? Why don't they have the gumption to take the next step? And yeah, around that time, when he got more into the Canadian side of things, let's put it that way, when he started going with more out there concepts and delved more into like the horror aspect, I was semi on board. I liked Red State a lot. Tusk, I actually like appreciated the weird, bizarre kind of idea of it, and the practical makeup effects on Justin Long were really convincing. And overall, I thought it was a solid film. I saw it in theaters with like me and two other people in the audience, but it was a solid enough viewing experience. But then, as time went on, stuff like Yoga Hosers, Jay and Silent Bob reboot, those really I didn't really have much connection to at that point. Like revisiting the View Askew universe, I felt was, if that's what he wants to do, that's what he's going to do. It was just not necessarily a ride I was willing to take with him at the time. And which is weird because when I went to, have that meet and greet with Kevin Smith was around the time Jay and Silent Bob reboot was going to be coming out. So I was still a fan, just not a fan of that particular focus he was deciding to go with. Yoga Hosers, I believe at the time I just felt like it was just too weird, and I didn't think had too much foundation, strong enough foundation to be a solid enough premise that a majority of the audience could get behind. But also at that point, I acknowledge, like, probably at that point he was wanting to appeal more to his hardcore base of fans, which, if you would ask me back in my teen years, maybe I would have considered myself to be a hardcore Kevin Smith fan. But as I got older, I just found myself to just appreciate what he was contributing in his own unique way to media and to film in general. Because actually, I was more into his podcasts, Smodcast. I was into the original Fat Man on Batman podcast, where he and Mark Bernard would talk about Batman and have guests on who were connected to the Batman franchise in many ways. Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, Paul Dini, a lot of great guests on that original iteration of the show. And then I just kind of stopped thinking about Kevin Smith stuff for a long time. Not because I was like, oh, I'm so done with this, but just because life took me in another direction. I ended up focusing my attention elsewhere. I ended up responding to other films or media in more significant ways that demanded my full focus. And it wasn't until Clerks 3 that I really returned to kind of looking back on his body of work. And not in the way I'd anticipated. Not in a way that was like full of like fondness and reappreciation and devotion and nostalgia, but also not in a way it's like, oh, what became of him? But in a way that definitely contributed more to my reflections on mortality and existential dread, because Clerks 3, I feel, is very much an expression of that. He has gone on the record as saying it's sort of an expression of his brush with death a couple years back when he had a heart attack, and kind of his way of processing that. And it comes through in the film very, very apparently, very directly. And while I haven't had a similar circumstance that he has, knock on wood, the themes of it definitely affected me in a way that I wasn't expecting, to the point where I wasn't laughing at the jokes necessarily. I wasn't feeling worn out or grated by some repeating motifs or characteristics and characters. But what I was feeling was an overwhelming swell of empathy and relatability to the idea of these characters dying. These characters no longer being around. And how it was such a delicate balance of appreciating their life, their stories, their friendship, but also a little bit of sadness in knowing that that's the final stamp. And I was like, wow, I'm having this response to Clerks 3. And like I said, it's not subtle in the slightest. Like, I love Kevin Smith's dialogue and the tangents his characters can go on, but one thing I'm going to say about Smith is subtlety isn't necessarily his strong suit, and I think he's kind of aware of that. He'll lay out his thesis statement for a lot of his films right out there. It's there in Dogma, and it's worded beautifully by a lot of really talented actors. But I mean, it's very apparent what he's doing in Dogma, and it's very apparent what he's doing in Clerks 3. The characters flat out say it, but it's done with enough humanity, enough relatability that I'm definitely gonna have to go back and rewatch it now, because now that I feel I've kind of come around to bend with regards to my own anxieties and my own views on mortality and death and the time we're allotted on this world. I wonder if I'd still have that same kind of feeling of panic and sadness that I had when I first saw it. I wonder if perhaps maybe there's something there that I can appreciate a little bit deeper or in a different way on a second viewing, because I haven't watched it since I first saw it. But that's the great thing about movies in general, I feel, not just Kevin's movies, but just movies in general, is you don't have to have a set opinion, a set response for films for the rest of your life. You can come back to these films, whether you're 15, 25, 35, or 45, or beyond, and it won't be the same. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That can be a very rewarding thing. That can be a very illuminating thing. You can discover things about yourself, not just in film, but in all forms of art. Coming back to a painting that you saw when you were 12 years old, coming back to that 20 years later, maybe once you gain an appreciation for the form of painting, or gained a little context as to the history of the artist and the time in which that painting was created, it can completely like turn you around on your perception of art. And I feel that's something that more people need to acknowledge, is we don't have to be unflinching on our perception of art, because art flinches, art bends and twists and can shape itself around to be something completely different, not just from person to person, but from moment to moment. The way I feel about Clerks today may not necessarily be the way I feel about it tomorrow or a month from now or a year from now. And that's okay. And I feel that's something that, you know what, I used to kind of not, I don't know what the word would be, not envy, but kind of feel annoyed by Kevin Smith in his later years, would be his kind of aversion to taking a firm stance on a particular piece of media or art, where he's just kind of like, it is what it is. You know, there's things I can enjoy about, there's things I can't enjoy about, and that's fine. Just because, I don't know, maybe I was up my own ass about certain, I don't know, pretensions about filmmaking, about storytelling, about characterization, and not necessarily in that same headspace anymore, where we can be as fluid and as open to the process of appreciating film and art in general, and that we don't have to have things set in stone, because we're not set in stone. We're constantly changing, we're constantly evolving, absorbing and appreciating things from different viewpoints throughout our lives, whether we realize it or not. And I don't want to be that person who's so set in his way and his viewpoints and his perceptions of things, especially things that are meant to bring me some degree of joy and escapism from, you know, the drudgeries that life can offer. And it's appropriate too that there's a little bit more light popping up now. Hopefully that picks up on the camera here, but I don't know. I know I might be going on something of a ramble, but that was kind of the mood this morning. I'm like, you know what? I want to get out to Red Bank. Whether it's raining, whether it's sunny, I want to get out here. I want to film something. And I want to talk about this local filmmaker who went out and made things, who went out and created things, and whether those things appeal to me now or never appealed to me, whether they're my taste or something I'm totally not into, so long as it's not doing anybody any harm, I can at least appreciate that he's out there doing things that bring him joy and hopefully bring other people joy, and hopefully we can all come back to and find different things to appreciate and value as time goes on. Uh, Snoochie Boochies, I guess.